Hello, my name is Clairborne Fowler, and I'm a current sophomore at Center College. I participated in this summer research project with Dr. Murray about education during a global pandemic. The title of my research is A Widening Education Gap: How Public and Private Schools Are Approaching Education During a Global Pandemic. With the inability to teach students in the classroom due to COVID-19, both public and private schools had to resort to online learning. However, this has led to a widening education gap due to how public and private schools were able to respond to the change in learning. Private schools that inherently have more money and resources also have students that are more likely to live in homes with good internet access, computers, spaces to focus, and parents who can help students with work as they're less likely to be working outside of the home. Privileged children who attend private school gain an unfair advantage over those who attend public school, leading to children having unequal opportunities for education due to a global pandemic they have no control over. So the most obvious difference between public and private schools is their dependence on government funding versus collecting fees from parents. The fact itself not only affects the student population, but also the resources these schools have access to. This is seen in a study conducted by Dronkers and Robert in 2008, which analyzes the differences in public and private schools across multiple countries with different education systems. They state that the general trend of research in this area is that children in private schools have higher net education achievement compared to those in public schools. The research cites that the reasons for the disparity may come from differences in student characteristics, school composition, different conditions for teachers, learning, and school administration, and different school climates. Private schools were also able to have smaller student-to-teacher ratios and technological resources, so they're not totally dependent on, because they're not totally dependent on the government for funding, and rather student fees and donations. Overall, multiple studies have found that public and private schools do not actually differ in scholastic achievement as much as predicted. The perceived higher scholastic achievement of private schools may come from the better social composition, leading to increased levels of educational outcomes. Dronkers and Roberts' specific study comes to the conclusion that private schools are perceived as better and do well because they attract students that can guarantee high scholastic outcomes. My research also informed me about a phenomenon called the summer slide, where students forget information from the school year over the summer. This disproportionately affects low-income students. As Godsey states in an article called Preparing for the COVID Slide, lengthy breaks can highlight the opportunity gap because students from upper and middle class families tend to engage in enrichment activities that underserved families do not have equal access to. This can be understood as the social capital theory, which describes how families in poor communities do not have the resources, experience, knowledge of high levels of schooling, political influence, or privileges to help in their child's success. Now, what does the summer slide mean for the extended summer many schools have had due to COVID-19, comparable to 2 consecutive summers? There's no doubt that this shift to distance learning will and has exacerbated the summer slide, especially since the shift was caused by trauma with students isolated from friends. Some might have lost family members, some family members may have been sick, and they also had parents who probably lost jobs. My research focused on the question of how has the differing abilities for private and public schools to educate their students during the COVID-19 pandemic affected the education gap. Both teachers and parents of students were interviewed to gather firsthand evidence and opinions from those primarily affected by the situation at hand. I intend to make their voices the forefront of this research, helping us understand how the global pandemic has contributed to the education gap between public and private school students. Parents and teachers in the Nashville and Franklin area of Tennessee at elementary, middle, and high schools were contacted over email. They answered an anonymous 5-question demographic survey, and they also participated in a one-on-one 30 to 45-minute Zoom interview with me. The parents were asked 10 open-ended questions, and teachers were asked 7 open-ended questions. So these are the questions that were in the parent interview, and they kind of focus on some general questions and then also how they perceive their students participate in school, as well as their own opinions about their satisfaction of how the school did. Here are the teacher interview questions, which also kind of have some general questions in the beginning and then go into their opinions and as well what they plan for their students to do. So here are the participant demographics. So I was able to interview 1 male and 7 females, and that was 3 teachers and 5 parents. And they ranged in ages from 29 to 53, with children in kindergarten through 9th grade and teachers who taught 7th through 12th grade. So here we can see the results of the parent interviews. So as you can see, there's a drastic difference in the amount of hours students spent on schoolwork, especially with 0 hours of live instruction for all public school parents interviewed. A public school parent of a 9th grader described that when they went under quarantine, the school did not continue classroom time at all. The parent also stated their child was given some recommendations for fun work that she did not participate in at all. There were no projects, and the only schoolwork was finishing assignments that were incomplete at the time school went online. Here are the results of the teacher interviews. So we continue to see the difference in the amount of schoolwork students were expected to do during the week. And although I have on here that the average amount of hours spent on schoolwork weekly for public school students was 2 hours, a high school public teacher I talked to described how the state mandated that nothing could legally be required of students, and therefore there were no grades. And so she planned on 2 hours of work weekly, and she said that she did not receive any work from 85% of her students after March, and even with an engagement estimated at about 15%, she only felt like 10% participated in meaningful learning. So both the public and private schools face an extremely difficult circumstance they were no control over. Nonetheless, the difference between how public and private schools were able to handle this unprecedented situation is drastic. So here's some of my conclusions. So first off, it's important for me to remind you that this research is still a work in progress as I review and collect more data. So far, I believe my results indicate that private schools are most likely going to be ahead by around 3 months. The private schools explored in this paper had access to laptops that students were used to using every day in school, as well as teachers equipped to handle this transition to online learning smoothly. Private school children, which make up about 10% of students in America, as I said before, are more likely to live in homes with good internet access, computers, spaces to focus, and parents who can help them. And I believe that this could lead to a devastating impact. With private schools having more resources and students in homes that make online learning more attainable, their students have most likely not had as drastic as a COVID slide as those in public school. So this study definitely has its limitations. As I said before, it was a really small participant pool, and they all came from Nashville and Franklin, Tennessee. And Franklin is more suburban, Nashville's definitely urban, but I definitely didn't have any examples of a rural area. And so it's kind of hard to generalize this on a large scale besides places that are similar to Nashville or Franklin. So my research brought up a lot of new questions for me. And as I said before, I'm not done with my research, so I might even delve into some of these as I continue. But I think some of these would be a really cool step in further research, like how will this affect children upcoming school year, especially since there'll be more time to prepare and distribute technology, and will that lead to better outcomes? And then even thinking about how the impact of the pandemic on students' mental health is going to affect their academic success. And especially what types of remote methods of learning work best for students. And then as these students come into classrooms with differing levels of retained knowledge because of their COVID slide, how are teachers going to assess that, and how are they going to help the students and get them all back on track? So these are my references. And overall, this has been an incredible experience and a super interesting topic of study. And I can't wait to continue my research, especially in this really historically significant age of COVID, when I can get some really great primary resources and talk to the teachers and students that are dealing with this right now. So thank you so much for listening.